We were talking too about anxiety. There's so much going on in the world today. It's, again, unless you're living in a cave, you can't hide yourself from it, and you can't help have it affect you in some way. I think beginning next week, probably on Tuesday, but maybe on Thursday, I'm going to start giving a series of talks related to the suttas. But there's many suttas the Buddha gave specifically on hatred and racism, even back then, and this underlying tension that it causes throughout the world. And there's really 3 or 4 interesting and I think really effective suttas. Just it has to be. I get emails all the time from students too. What about this and what about that? What do you think about that thing down in Charlottesville? What do I think? I think it's awful. But it all has its roots in ignorance, what the Buddha awakened to. So, all right. Excuse me. So, just to put this in the right context, Tuesday night there was a lot of new people here. So I ran the class a little differently. I gave an introduction and then we meditated. Typically we meditate first and then I'll give a talk. So that's what we'll do tonight. The talk tonight is one of my favorite suttas. It's the sutta is called the mindfulness, not mindfulness, but here, the Rahulavada Sutta, where the Buddha teaches his 7-year-old son mindfulness of the Dhamma. And it's a great sutta. But we'll meditate first for 20 minutes. So find your relaxed meditative posture. Are you comfortable with it?
Yeah, I haven't gotten it down, but I'm working on it.
And you'll get more and more comfortable. That's just about how I've been sitting for 37 years, and it took me a while to get used to it. You remember I mentioned if you need to move. Mm-hmm. Don't think you have to be so rigid that becomes a distraction. So gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And holding your back straight, but not stiff. Your ears aligned with your shoulders. The nose aligned with your navel. But holding yourself very loosely, very gently, very lovingly. Allow yourselves to settle into this room. Settle onto your seats. Settle into your bodies. And settle into your minds. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. Just get a feel for what that's like, to be mindful of your breath in your body. And while remaining mindful of your breath in your body, notice if thoughts are flowing. We're conscious beings, thoughts should be flowing. The purpose of meditation is to not be distracted by your own thoughts. So when you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. Relaxing your thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. 20 minutes with callbacks every 5 minutes. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. And when you're ready, You can gently open your eyes. So the Rahulavada Sutta, in this sutta, the Buddha teaches his 7-year-old son the proper application of mindfulness. And it's really, when you think about the setting, it's really such a beautiful teaching. You know, here's an awakened human being who at that point in his life has the responsibility for just about everything that's going on in the world, in his confined world. And yet he has the time to teach the Dhamma in such a simple and direct way to his 7-year-old son. One of the reasons why that's so important to me is I get this question occasionally, but more often than I'd like to. Wasn't it incredibly selfish for a man of 26 years old, 29, to leave his wife and his family, who had just had Rahula? He was 2 or 3 months old when Siddhartha Gautama left to seek enlightenment. Wasn't that incredibly selfish of him to do so? And there's a few things that are misunderstood around that. One, it was common for men around his age to leave their family and seeking enlightenment, and it was seen as a selfless act. In other words, that was good for all of humanity, for these seekers to go out and develop an understanding, and they would come back and teach the community. So it was an honorable act, not a selfish act. And what's often left out of that that dialogue that tries to look like it's selfish is that upon the Buddha's awakening, his wife eventually became part of the Sangha and awakened. And eventually, as you'll see here, Rahula was deeply interested in the Dhamma, and he eventually joined the Sangha and awakened too. The Buddha also taught his father, the king, throughout his teaching career too. So there was nothing selfish about what the Buddha did. In this sutta, the Buddha's teachings of personal behavior are found in the virtuous factors of the Eightfold Path of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And those can be summarized as remaining harmless and free of clinging, including clinging to views of self in thought, word, and deed. And as you hear this sutta, you'll realize where that comes up in Rahula. The Buddha was sitting with his son, who was 7 at the time. The Buddha asked Rahula if he saw the few drops of water left in the ladle the Buddha was holding. He replied that he did. The Buddha tells Rahula, that is how little understanding one has who tells deliberate lies. So apparently he caught Rahula in a little lie just before this. The Buddha then tosses away the few drops of water and tells Rahula, who feels no shame in telling deliberate lies, has tossed away their mindfulness, tossed away their mind. The Buddha then turns the ladle upside down and tells Rahula, a person who feels no shame in telling deliberate lies, mindfulness upside down. He's teaching a very direct but a very profound concept to a 7-year-old boy, isn't he? But yet, he understands in the way that he's teaching it through that metaphor that Rahula is going to understand this. The Buddha then shows Rahula the empty ladle and says, whoever feels no shame in telling a deliberate lie is as empty and hollow as this ladle. Anyone who feels no shame in telling deliberate lies is capable of any wrongdoing. Train yourself, Rahula. I will not tell a deliberate lie for any reason, even jokingly. The Buddha asks Rahula if he knows what a mirror is for, and Rahula replies, for reflection, sir. The Buddha responds, in the same way, your thoughts, words, and deeds must be done with constant reflection. Reflect in this manner. Is this thought, word, or deed skillful? And in that way, the Buddha means, does it fall within the framework of the Eightfold Path? Will it lead to harm for myself or others, or will it lead to release from craving and clinging to ignorant views? Thought, word, or deed bring more suffering for myself or others, or will it have a peaceful result? If upon reflection your thoughts, words, and deeds will have peaceful results, then this is fit for you and fit for a person developing understanding, developing the Eightfold Path. Again, a very simple and direct teaching on reflect on what you're saying, what your actions might do, what you're engaging with in a general sense. Take a moment to think about the results and the implications of whatever you're doing. The Buddha is also teaching his son to develop a calm and peaceful mind in order to be able to do this. How can you think before you act? Well, you have to have a well-concentrated mind. And you also have to know how to frame what you're thinking. And the reason why that is we can think ourselves into any type of behavior, can't we? And think that it's justified. Deluded we might get. And like, again, just to use it as an example, look what happened in Charlotte. People that act like that think they're right from some point of view. And they think they're right because of the way that they think. In the Vitakka-Santana Sutta, Kevin knows this because I reference it often. The Vitakka-Santana Sutta, the Buddha teaches, it's not a long sutta, but it takes him a while to get to the point that we gain the ability to think what we want to think when we want to think it. And it's always appropriate because it's framed by the Eightfold Path. There's nothing, there can be no harm in our thoughts, words, or our deeds at that point. The Buddha continues, Rahula, all those who purify their minds through continual reflection or mindfulness will do so in just this way. Rahula, you should train yourself in just this way through continual mindfulness of your thoughts, words, and deeds. These are my words now. Of course, it takes great wisdom developed through the Eightfold Path to completely understand all of the effects of our thoughts, words, and deeds. Mindfulness of thoughts, words, and deeds is supported by right view and right intention, and deepens as concentration develops through right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation. Even at a young age, Rahula was able to develop mindfulness of his thoughts, words, and actions, and to develop heightened virtue. Rahula, guided by his father's wisdom and direct path to awakening, became a monk, and in his lifetime put aside all clinging and awakened. He gained full human maturity. To some, mindfulness of personal behavior as behavior unfolds seems too mundane to be of much importance. Analyzing behavior becomes more important than simple recognition and renunciation. In other words, we get into why am I acting this way? Why am I thinking this way? What happened in my life to cause me to act this way? Who is there to blame for my actions? And we do that all the time. And a lot of analysis, when you really look at it, is geared more towards blaming, whether yourself or the environment or a specific person, rather than simply recognizing that your behavior and thought, word, and deed in this moment is unskillful, and to develop skillful behavior. That's really the direct answer to it. Analyzing behavior becomes more important than simple recognition and renunciation. Rituals, conceptual applications, and outer forms often are more appealing means of practice. In other words, and this is common in many spiritual practices and many religious practices. The teaching that we should act in a certain way becomes more important than we should think in a certain way. And the Buddha realized this during his time too. There was the same type of spiritual religious teachings that you should act in a certain way. The Buddha realized that people failed in that repeatedly because they were thinking based on an aspect of mindlessness or not being mindful of the proper way to think and act. Think what you want to act, think what you want to think when you want to think it. Developing and occupying a view of what it means to be a Buddhist can be as empty and hollow as an empty ladle if the virtuous factors of the Eightfold Path are overlooked or diminished in importance. And again, I'm not going to get on a soapbox here because I do it often enough. But there's a lot of modern Buddhism and came to the West of rather famous and well-known teachers claiming that they're teaching Buddhism that ended up hurting themselves and their students directly in very, very egregious ways. And they overlooked the simple direction of the Eightfold Path. You could not act in that way, and you could not do that if you actually practice it. If you develop the Eightfold Path to the point that you are teaching it, you should have and you would have gotten past the point where you could do some of the things that have happened in modern times. Just in the last couple of weeks, there were two famous teachers in the Tibetan lineage that finally admitted that they were abusing their students in sexual ways and other things that they were doing. And that's not, unfortunately, that's not uncommon. And the only reason I'm getting on that little sandbox again right now is to make that point, that if you simply follow what the Buddha taught his 7-year-old son and practice it, you couldn't end up acting in that way that's hurtful towards other people. And you certainly wouldn't end up taking a position as a teacher of Buddhism and acting in that way. And it's often excused. It's remarkable to me. I've been around this a long time. I remember one, and I won't name any of the teachers, but there was a very, very famous one who was known what he was doing. This is back in 1987, I think it was, maybe a couple years after that. And his organization still stands. It's still a worldwide organization, and he's still revered. And it's just surprising to me why you would want to even follow anyone that acted that way. The excuse is, and this is, I'm sorry, I'm getting way off the topic. The excuse is that, well, he was so far advanced in his teaching that his behavior didn't matter. Can you imagine if the Buddha acted that way? There'd be no such thing as Buddhism. They would have discounted him immediately. If your behavior is a reflection of what you're holding in mind, isn't it? And now I can bring it back to the sutta. That's exactly what the Buddha's teaching, little Rahula. What you're holding in mind, if it's as empty as an empty ladle, you'll be that empty. If you're holding in mind the factors of the Eightfold Path, then you will have the inclination and the mindfulness in order to awaken, to develop full human maturity. So I think there's a little bit more to the article. But I think that's enough. I think I made my point, especially. Excuse me for getting up on the sandbox. But
no, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's you're right, Tim. It's fascinating to me how people. I understand how people fall into patterns of behavior that are hurtful towards others. I did that. I did a lot of things in my youth and early adulthood that I wish I never did, but they proved to be hurtful to them. All of that revolved around alcohol and drugs. I never, not that I'm defending myself, I never sexually abused anybody, but to do that from a place of authority and power as a Buddhist monk or a nun, I mean, it's not just monks, but it's mostly, to me, it's just the most egregious thing you can do, whether it's in a Buddhist cloth or a priest cloth, just to do that. And it's one of those things that got me looking at, you don't know, my story is on the website in my new book, so you get a little bit more of this background. But while I was engaged in Tibetan Buddhism and then Zen Buddhism, I was becoming aware of these things that were happening within the Tibetan and the Zen community, their students. And I had this at first kind of this underlying thought that how can that happen if this teaching is so advanced and it leads to awakening and it's supposed to be based on compassion? But because of the community that I was involved with, and this is where associations are important, because it was being overlooked in those communities, it was implied that I should simply overlook it. And so I did. I wanted to be part of the community. I took my vows in a Tibetan community, and then I left to join the Zen community, and I had some of the teachers that were later exposed to be this way. And it's a hard thing when you're that deeply involved to say that the teacher was wrong in what he was teaching, or he could have never ended up that way. Because then you're really challenging yourself. You're saying, well, you wasted your time. But it took me a long time to realize, yeah, I did. In a sense, I really wasted my time because I was following a teaching that could allow for behavior like that. And it wasn't until I came to what was the pure teachings of the Buddha as preserved in the Sutta Pitakas, that type of behavior is only possible for someone who is beginning to develop the path. If you develop the path, if you become awakened, if you develop full human maturity, being hurtful towards others in any way is simply impossible. It's not a choice. You develop a way of living in the world that you remain harmless to yourselves and others. So as a teacher, you certainly couldn't be acting in that way, and the excuse that you're so far advanced, and this is still used. that you're so far advanced that you're beyond acting in any compassionate way is just ridiculous. And again, when you follow what the Buddha taught, it's simply not possible. When the Buddha was first awakened, and he was walking down the street, and the 5 friends that had kind of turned their back on him because he left what they were practicing to shun the Buddha, but they looked at the way he was carrying himself, the way he was walking, and they realized they no longer could. We should use the same. I'm talking kind of out of context of our class tonight. In Buddhism, we should use the same discernment if we're going to follow something. Is it useful to follow this? And look at what the teachers have done with it. So that's all. I'm sorry for the rant. Tim, did you have a question too before?
Yeah, it's not so much a question, and I don't want to take away from the lesson, but
that's what this time is for. So.
When you talk about the Eightfold Path, I don't know much about that. And is there literature on your website, or is there something that can be purchased or that I can read so I can familiarize myself with it? Not knowing, just to know what it is, so I have a frame of reference.
Yes. The drop-down menu, I think it says Dhamma Articles and Talks, has a specific category for Eightfold Path and Four Noble Truths. There's also a link at the top of the page that says for new visitors, and that has some links to get you started. I also have 2 books out there. I'm not trying to sell you a book, but the reason why I wrote these books is to explain the Buddha's teachings in the proper context. And so the newest book is called Becoming Buddha, and that presents the broadest context of what he taught.
Is it more of an advanced book, or is it a book where I can, as a beginner, as somebody who's new to this, can understand and learn?
I'm going to ask Kevin to his opinion on that, but I would say the reason why I wrote the book is so that anybody could pick it up,
okay, and
read it, and at least start getting a general understanding of the context. And the reason why you hear me saying context, is it's so important to understand the overall context of what the Buddha was teaching and why he taught, to understand any specific teaching, including the Eightfold Path. The only path the Buddha ever taught towards awakening, towards developing full human maturity, was the Eightfold Path. And he taught it for a very specific reason: to get past conditioning that we all have developed simply as part of having a human life. And that it's that conditioned mind that wants to ignore anything that would challenge those views that we hold. So does that last little bit make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And I've often felt, living on the East Coast in New Jersey, and with my life almost out of place. Not that I have a family, I have a wife, I have a wonderful job, everything on the surface, wonderful, but I often feel, how can I be, when all around me is noise and all this negativity, and so I often feel like, boy, it'd be, if I could just be somewhere where there's more peacefulness and quietness, I'd probably be able to be okay. And I almost feel like part of the reason why I'm seeking this out is to help me manage those distractions and that pollution, if you will, that we have to go through on a daily life.
That's a very common feeling, although most people aren't willing to even look at it in the depth that you are. And there's a sutta called the Ratana Sutta, the Sutta of Taking Refuge. And in that sutta, the Buddha teaches, I won't give that whole teaching, but he teaches a town that is devastated by what's occurring in their environment. And he first tells them to address the physical needs of what they have to take care of, and then to take refuge in the Buddha. This is called the triple refuge, taking refuge in the Buddha, his teachings, and the Sangha. Take refuge in the Buddha, which means to take refuge that a human being was just as disturbed and distracted by his life, but he was able to develop an understanding and awaken, meaning he was able to live life with a peaceful and calm mind no matter what was going on around him. Take refuge in the fact that that awakened human being left his teaching, the Dhamma. And one of the most remarkable things to me in my life is that those same teachings are still available to us today. you got to look for them a little bit deeper than I wish you'd had to, but they're still here. And they're contained in a book called the Pali Canon in a specific section called the Sutta Pitaka. And that's what I teach, and that's what changed everything for me when I started reading that and developing an understanding. The third refuge is taking refuge in the Sangha, that we have, that we don't have to do it alone, that there's like-minded people that are doing this, and that we actually have a well-focused Sangha. And then if I could add a fourth refuge, it's simply taking, and this is really taking refuge in the Dhamma, taking refuge in our meditation practice. Today, for a few minutes, we can leave all that stuff behind that you just described as distracting and disturbing, and take refuge. Find a place to just sit quietly. And that gives us the ability to get up off our cushion and be in any environment, ultimately, and maintain a peaceful and calm mind. When the Buddha described an awakened human being, described the quality of their mind, he used one word, calm, or sometimes peaceful, or sometimes released, meaning as released from craving and clinging that things be different than they are. An awakened human being has a mind that rests in calm and peace. So I asked a little question of Kevin before. Do you think, have you read enough of the new book to comment on it?
I think I have. I mean, I have read quite a bit of it, up through 165 pages, up through the 5 cleaning aggregates.
Okay, good.
So it's the 3, anicca, anatta, and dukkha, and then the 5 cleaning aggregates. And it's hard for me to answer that question because I have read so many other things this year. To me, it's deeper, but maybe it's because I just think about it more deeply. When I was first reading, I would have to learn the terms, try to piece together the terms, and now that I'm reading about it in this book, it seems deeper to me, maybe because I'm reading it more deeply and because I'm coming to so many classes that I see it differently now. But that being said, I just like the way it's laid out, the foundation of it, like who was the Buddha and what were his main teachings and what are the fundamentals, and that's where it's moving. And it's going to go through that, and it talks about the Eightfold Path. So, and then, you have the book, the
Truth of Happiness.
The Truth of Happiness, right?
Yeah.
And that goes through the steps, through essentially 10, but it's a little bit more. And it's similar, but it's also a way of learning about this in going through it and then seeing how it all fits together. But, having read that first and then reading this, it seems that this is deeper, or it's richer somehow, but maybe that's better, and maybe a newcomer would also see that.
Yeah,
I think it's totally comprehensible.
Okay.
Thank you, Kevin. The first book, called The Truth of Happiness, is a 10-week study of the Buddha's teachings. The subjects are the same. The way it's laid out is slightly different. And it's really a study guide for the new book, even though that came out first. So it's not even, I wouldn't even say it's an introduction. But really the way I see the 2 books now is that, and you're free to read them however you want or not read them at all, is that you would read the broader framework and then use The Truth of Happiness as a personal study of that. And that's written as a way that you can interact with me too, online through emails and phone calls if you want. The Truth of Happiness book. So to answer your question, I think the Becoming Buddha, the newer book, would give you a very, very broad and comprehensive look at what the Buddha taught and how to develop the teachings. As long as you can get past the need to understand everything to the word, to the letter.
I don't mind reading the book 4 or 5 times.
Good, because
That's a good book when you can do that.
The trick about it, and I realized this many years ago when I started teaching, every class I could sit here and talk for 45 minutes and lay out exactly what the Buddha taught, and it would be completely meaningless because I wouldn't be presenting it in the right context, and I wouldn't be giving people an opportunity to develop it over time, which is how it's done. So I would say if you really want to get that broad understanding, read Becoming Buddha, and then please continue to come to class, because that gives you an opportunity to interact with other folks who are developing it. And we do this every week. There's a question and answer period too. So again, just to put you on the spot, Kevin, there's a lot to integrate and understand. And in that way, it's not all that simple, but it is direct in a progressive way.
It is. Yes, I think it is. Yeah. You know, I think that's in a way that's the way it's laid out. It's laid out in the historical context, like where did this come from? How did it get preserved? And then we start to get into the meat of the fundamental teachings of what it is, what those are.
Yeah, and I think that the reason why I start with a very brief history of a human being, Siddhartha Gautama. And the reason why most important things to understand is that first refuge, that a human being set out to develop a certain understanding, and he actually did it. If one human being can do it, this is my thinking, this human being can do it. And he never presented himself in any special way, like he had magical or mystical or godlike powers, which is one of the problems with the later developed schools. And then to understand that why his teachings can be taken as authentic. That's the next section in the book. So you have some confidence in what you're reading. It's not just something that really isn't rooted in anything that's realistic. Some of the later Buddhist sutras, there's a difference between sutras and suttas. They're almost nonsensical, no context for looking at them. You can believe them, like the Heart Sutra or the Lotus Sutra. And if you just take them for what they're saying, okay, you can make a religion out of them, which is what has happened. But when you look at them realistically, there's no real substance there, and that's the problem I had. Even though I practiced for many years, I did it faithfully, and I realized that faith doesn't have anything to do with this. You know, that was the problem. I was being asked to take things on faith rather than my direct experience. And when I came to what the Buddha taught, he insisted that you actually have this experience of understanding. Don't just believe me. One of his famous saying is, don't go by other people's accounts. Develop this, meaning develop the Eightfold Path, and you'll have the experience yourself.
Interesting too, you know, even in right action, in the simplest right actions that there are, that we talked about a few weeks ago, and it's in many teachings, there are 5 basic things that even a lay person can do as right action.
Yep.
You know, don't kill other beings, steal from people, don't abuse people sexually, don't commit any sexual acts against others, and don't lie, and don't take intoxicants.
Yep.
But the Buddhist monks have something like 220 rules.
The nuns even more.
Yeah, and they recite them apparently every new moon.
Some traditions do that.
Yeah, some traditions do that, and there are a lot of them, and that must, refine what do I mean by must not abuse others sexually or
well, a lot of them are how to live within using the word loosely, a spiritual community.
Yeah.
How to live within it.
Yeah, that is specific if you're in that community. Yeah, not just a lay person.
And that grew out of a set of books that it's also still part of the Pali Canon called the Vinaya Pitaka. And a lot of those were just the rules that the Buddha developed for living in a Sangha in that time. There's one that always comes to mind just because it's silly, is that there was a rather famous visitor that was visiting the Sangha one day. But they still had, they used urinals at times. And one of the monks was cleaning out his urinal one day and threw it off the roof. And it happened to hit this guy, this this. So one of the Vinaya rules was, you don't throw your urine off a roof. I bring it just because it's so practical, but it needed to be said because of what developed in that. Those 5 that you mentioned, again, the incredible wisdom of an awakened human being to say, do these 5 things, and you're basically good to go. If you can live your life by not breaking these 5 rules, you'll be living as an awakened human being. And then if you continue to develop the entire Eightfold Path, you will awaken. But if you try to do one without the other, you're going to be lost. There's many, many people that live well-intentioned lives that can't help but lying occasionally or engaging, some Buddhist teachers engaging in sexual misconduct and excusing it away by saying, well, I'm really trying and I'm good and I do so much good in the world. Well, that's great. That should be acknowledged. But if you want to awaken, entire Eightfold Path, you can't leave nothing out. What's the end result of it? A mind of lasting peace and happiness, which is really what we're all after. It feels like, especially for people beginning, I'm not pointing this right out to you, Tim. Beginners, people beginning in general, when they start realizing the ramifications of what the Buddha is teaching, it feels like we're gonna lose everything. It's complete annihilation of self. This teaching, what I hope I'm teaching, is we're letting go of things that are only hurtful towards ourselves and others. We're letting go of behavior that creates disturbance and agitation, ongoing craving and clinging in our minds. So in that sense, it's not so much of the effect that it has on the outer world. Most of us aren't murderers. Most of us aren't stealing things. Most of us aren't driving cars into people. That's gross and egregious behavior that is easily recognized. But most of us continue that initial ignorance and create disturbances in our own minds and then excuse it away because we say, well, we're doing okay. We're doing the best we can. And that's okay. We should learn to be gentle with ourselves. But if we want to awaken, if we want to live lives of lasting peace and happiness, if we want to develop an awakened mind, we have to recognize and abandon those things that fall outside of the Eightfold Path. And that's the real power in the Eightfold Path. When we finally integrate it, I don't mean finally develop it completely, but when we finally integrate it, it brings us great freedom because we know that if we're acting within that framework, we can no longer do any harm to ourselves or to others. It's simply impossible. And that's, again, tying it back into tonight's talk, that's what the Buddha was teaching Rahula. The Buddha's teaching this little 7-year-old son. To most people, and it's a reasonable way to look at it, a 7-year-old who tells an occasional white lie, that's not too bad, is it? In fact, most of us would be pretty happy if that's as far as that behavior went. But in the context of the Dhamma, we should be mindful of even that smallest transgression because we're going to end up like upside down empty ladles if we don't. Any other questions about the talk tonight?
I could go all night, but that's a lot of information.
It is.
It is wonderful.
And it's great that this was like a child, but it's almost like we are all the children when we're beginners like this. This is,
yeah,
very basic teaching that.
It's got me thinking of something else too in relation to this. Like, we don't scold a 7-year-old for their ignorance. We shouldn't scold ourselves. We should simply recognize it and recognize what happens if we continue to ignore it. Recognize it, change our behavior. What's not working for us? I mean, when I first realized this, that it wasn't endless rites and rituals, it had nothing to do with worship, it had nothing to do with doing things for merit, that it was up to the way that I thought and the way that I acted that was most important. At first, a little hard to deal with because of the responsibility there. Another aspect of living in ignorance is we don't have to take responsibility for anything, including the belief that a higher being is going to take care of it. I don't want to get into that discussion. But I also realized the incredible freedom that was in that. It's up to me. All the things that I ever really wanted in life. I grew up wanting the things that most in the West want: big house, big car. I was going to say big girls, but for a pretty girl. But that really fell away at an early age, especially when I started looking at what was most important. But I still felt like I needed to develop an outward appearance that would protect this inner me. And it wasn't until I realized that I had it completely backwards, that this great sense of freedom and release really came over me. And that was when I understood what the Buddha meant through the Four Noble Truths. It's not an outside. And that also led me to understand doesn't mean that anything outside of is bad in any way. It's how I attach myself to it or don't. What I do with what I have is most important, not what I have. So, incredible teaching. So again, any other questions or comments?
Well, I have one.
Please.
If this is too direct, let me know. But reading your website and on you're talking about the Eightfold Path. But the ability to reconcile with yourself on things that you may have done or felt, and then going forward, it seems that, I mean, obviously I'm new, so I don't know, maybe it'll change for me, but it always seems that this feeling of from the past, which is really silly to think, like it's the past, comes in and brings these feelings out. So as your path and the Eightfold Path, how are you able to reconcile those things and be able to accept it and forgive yourself and do those things?
It's such a great question. Thank you for the directness of it. That feeling that your past is still affecting you or you're dragging it around with you is an aspect of conditioned thinking. And it's an aspect of clinging, and I won't get into that too deep. I never did anything in my life to intentionally hurt someone, but I did do a lot of things that did end up hurting people, especially people closest to me, my family, some partners or spouses, meaning girls that I lived with and one that I was married to. A direct way that I did is when I realized in myself the actual harm that I did someone, and it was a pretty big list, I went to them and I apologized. And that was really an important part of it. And this is related more to I don't know if you read my whole story, I'm a recovered alcoholic and drug addict. And part of the recovery in that is often overlooked today is that direct acknowledgement of the harms you did. And then beyond that, as I started developing the Dhamma, I realized that there were things that I had yet to take responsibility for. And I went directly to the people when it was possible and said, I recognize this in my behavior. Now, how I reconciled it in myself is I realized that all of those things that I did that hurt people were the result of ignorance of, and again, I won't get into too long of a talk, of the way things really are, meaning the three marks of existence. And it took me a while to work through that, but I eventually realized that person I was when I was 15, 18, 19, doing hurtful things towards people is not who I am today. There's an identity, but I also, one of the aspects of impermanence, the Pali word is anicca, is that everything is in a constant state of change, including myself. And so that idea that I'm that same person as I was when I was 14 is a wrong view. It's simply not true. Even though there's some continuity there, continuity obscures the impermanence of all things. So what that eventually led me to develop, and this is where right view comes in, is that the person I am today is the person I think I am today. That makes sense? And so if I think of myself as a person who should feel guilty for something that they did based in ignorance and has been amended, that's a wrong view. I can't do anything to change it. The only thing I can change is who I am in this moment. And so, and there was a little bit more to the process, and it wasn't this immediate and this direct, but it literally was through the Eightfold Path that I was able to let go of the past and become who I am in the moment. And that leads to the name of the book. Again, I'm not trying to sell the book. Becoming Buddha means becoming awakened. And if I am stuck in views of myself from the past, or if I allow other people to keep me in those views, and there's still some people in my life that can't let go of the past and want to see me in that way, If I allow that to continue, then I'm only continuing my own suffering. I wanted to awaken as the Buddha taught awakening, and the Eightfold Path allowed me to develop that. Realize that what's most important is how I think in this moment, and really how I think about myself. That can lead some people to think, well, that's a very arrogant way, and I've had people question that. It could be. It could be a very arrogant way of looking at yourself and the way you relate to the world if you did not have the well-integrated Eightfold Path. Because right view and the rest of the Eightfold Path keeps me continually mindful of the reason why other people act the way they act. It keeps me continually mindful of the suffering that other people are going through because of their lack of understanding. And it also allows me to recognize when people have. It's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Thank you for sharing.
Did I answer it?
Yes.
Okay.
It could even get into a whole different conversation about karma and the nature of karma in the Buddhist way of thinking too.
So let me comment then.
your actions then lead to consequences now, or each moment it could lead to. These actions can lead to what's emerging, what's becoming in the next moment.
That's another aspect of conditioned thinking. Karma is the present moment unfolding of past intentional actions, modified by our present level of mindfulness, which means if our mindfulness is developing towards inclination of awakening, then we can begin to diminish the effects of past behavior. If our minds are still rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, then that momentum of the past is going to continue to drive what's occurring in the present and what's occurring in the next moment. And that leads to an understanding of what we're giving birth to, rebirth. And I'm not talking about a future birth. If our minds are well framed by the Eightfold Path, we will become more awakened in each moment. If we continue to be stuck in ignorance, our karma is going to drive us to just more ignorant moments, prone to suffering. So that's really the right way to look at it too. So thank you.
Yeah, that's the way to say it too. So clear what you're saying.
I think as I go on forward, the noise, the noise will make more sense.
Oh yeah, yeah. You've
recognize it as noise too, and that it's a permanent, and you can let it go too.
Yeah, don't try to get. You've heard a lot this week in two classes, so.
I'm not. Believe me, that's why I'm coming to a lot of classes, because I need to be said a bunch of times.
Everybody does. Everybody does. I mean, we've had students that have been coming for 2 and 3 years, and they finally say, "I got it." And the only reason I got it is because they kept coming and listening to it in different contexts and different suttas. It said the Buddha gave 84,000 discourses, suttas. The number just means a lot. But every sutta he ever taught was taught in the context of Four Noble Truths. And so every class I teach is based on one of the suttas. You start putting them together and they start making sense. It's rooted and it's founded in meditation. And as our concentration deepens and we hear more of the Eightfold Path, we're able to realize how we integrate it. But you're giving yourself a great start this week. So glad you came back. Any other questions or comments? Kevin, thank you for your input tonight too. It was invaluable. We close every class with Metta, so we'll do the same here with the Metta Sutta. I explained this Tuesday night, I think. So, find your relaxed meditative posture and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. And let that mindfulness of your breath cease any distracting thoughts to the past or to the future, or that may have arisen from our talk tonight. And these are the Buddha's words on Metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you for a wonderful class. Peace. Tim, tell Jimmy I said hello and thanks for